Hi everyone, I'm Emma.
I'm Jack. Welcome
Welcome
to
to
our
our
channel.
channel. Have you ever noticed that you seem like a completely different person depending on who you are with? Maybe when you are with your family, you become quieter, more cautious, or even feel like you are returning to the person you were years ago. But when you are with close friends, you might become more playful, more confident, and more expressive. Then at work, you may become another version of yourself again. More professional, more careful with your words, and more focused on responsibilities. It raises an interesting question. Which one is the real you?
That is such a fascinating question because almost everyone experiences this, but many people rarely stop to think about it. We often assume there should be one fixed version of ourselves. We imagine that being authentic means acting exactly the same everywhere with everyone. But human beings are much more complicated than that. We naturally adjust to different environments and relationships.
Exactly. And I think some people worry about this. They think, if I behave differently around different people, does that mean I am being fake? They feel like they are pretending or hiding something. But maybe adapting is not always pretending. Maybe it is simply a natural part of being human.
Right. There is a big difference between changing yourself because you are afraid of being rejected and changing your behavior because you understand the situation you are in. For example, someone might speak differently with a child compared with a professional colleague. That does not mean they are dishonest. It means they understand communication.
That's a great example. A person can be serious in one situation and humorous in another. They can be responsible at work and relaxed with friends. They can be independent in some areas and need support in others. Those differences do not necessarily mean there are many fake versions of themselves. They may simply show different parts of the same person.
I really like that idea. Different parts of the same person. Because sometimes we think identity is like a single picture, but maybe it is more like a collection of many pictures. Every relationship, every experience, and every environment brings out something different.
Yes, and that makes me wonder, do other people create different versions of us, or do they simply reveal versions that already exist inside us?
That is a deep question. Personally, I think other people often reveal parts of us that are already there. A friend might bring out your humor. A teacher might bring out your curiosity. A difficult situation might bring out your courage. Those qualities were not created by those people, but the relationship gave them a chance to appear.
I love that explanation because it suggests that we are not completely different people. We are more like a person with many rooms, and different people have access to different rooms.
That is a beautiful metaphor. Some people only know one room in our personality. They know the professional side of us, or the funny side, or the serious side. But nobody outside ourselves usually sees every room.
And maybe that is why misunderstandings happen. Someone might think they know us completely because they have seen one side of us, but they may not realize there are many other sides.
Exactly. Someone might say, "You are such a quiet person," but another person might say, "You are the most energetic person I know." Both people could be right because they are experiencing different parts of you.
That happens a lot. I remember hearing people describe the same person in completely opposite ways. One person says, she is very shy. Another person says, she is very outgoing. And you wonder, how can both opinions exist at the same time?
Because personality is not always fixed in the way we imagine. Context matters. A person may feel comfortable and expressive in a familiar environment, but become reserved in a new one. That does not mean they are confused. It means their sense of safety changes.
Safety is such an important word here. I think many people misunderstand confidence. They think confident people are confident everywhere, with everyone, all the time. But maybe confidence is often connected to feeling safe.
Absolutely. Someone can be extremely confident with close friends but nervous in a formal situation. Someone can be excellent at their job but uncomfortable at social events. Confidence is not always a permanent personality trait. It can depend on the relationship between the person and the environment.
That makes a lot of sense. Because our surroundings send us signals. They tell us what is acceptable, what is expected, and how we should behave.
Yes, human beings are social creatures. We naturally pay attention to other people's reactions. From childhood, we learn how to behave by observing the people around us. We learn what gets approval, what creates conflict, and what helps us connect.
And that learning process continues throughout life.
Exactly. Even as adults, we are constantly adjusting. We notice the atmosphere of a room. We notice people's emotions. We change our communication depending on who we are speaking with.
But then we come to another interesting question. When does adapting become losing yourself?
That is probably the most important part of this conversation.
Because adapting is natural, but constantly changing yourself to please everyone can become exhausting.
Absolutely. There is a difference between flexibility and abandoning yourself. Flexibility means you can adjust while still staying connected to who you are. Abandoning yourself means you ignore your own needs and values just to gain acceptance.
That difference is huge.
For example, imagine someone who loves expressing their opinions but always stays silent because they are afraid people will disagree. Over time, they may become disconnected from their own voice.
Yes, or someone who changes their interests, personality, or goals depending on who they are around because they want everyone to like them.
Exactly. That can create a very confusing experience because they may eventually ask themselves, who am I when nobody is watching?
That is such a powerful question.
And many people struggle with it because they have spent so much time adjusting to others that they have not spent enough time listening to themselves.
I think this is especially common for people who are naturally sensitive to others' emotions. They can easily understand what other people need, but they sometimes forget to ask what they need.
Yes, being emotionally aware is a strength, but it needs balance. Understanding others is valuable, but your own feelings deserve attention too.
There is something interesting about childhood here as well. When we are children, we often behave differently depending on whether we are at home, at school, or with friends. But as we grow older, we become more aware of these differences.
That is true. Children usually do not analyze their identity in the same way adults do. They simply react. Adults start asking deeper questions. Am I being myself? Do people really know me? Which version of me is real?
Maybe adulthood brings more self-awareness, but sometimes that awareness also creates more confusion.
Definitely. Knowing yourself is valuable, but it can also create difficult questions. The more you understand yourself, the more you notice your contradictions.
And maybe contradictions are not a problem,
I agree. They might actually be proof that you are human.
because we often expect ourselves to be consistent all the time. We think, if I am a kind person, I should never feel angry. Or, if I am confident, I should never feel insecure. But people contain many different emotions.
Exactly. A person can be confident and uncertain. They can be independent and still need help. They can love someone and still feel frustrated with them. Human experiences are complex.
I think accepting that complexity is part of accepting ourselves.
Yes, the goal is not to remove all contradictions. The goal is to understand them.
Something else I find interesting is how certain people can bring out memories of who we used to be. Have you ever met someone from your past and suddenly felt like you became your younger self again? Maybe you start talking in an old way, remembering old jokes, or feeling emotions that you haven't experienced for years.
Yes, and that happens more often than people realize. Certain relationships are connected to specific versions of ourselves. A childhood friend might remind us of the person we were before we had responsibilities and worries. A former classmate might bring back the confidence, insecurity, or dreams we had at that stage of life.
It is almost like people become connected to different chapters of our identity.
Exactly. Some people are connected to our past. Some people are connected to our present. Some people may even represent the person we want to become in the future.
That is such an interesting way to see relationships. We usually think relationships are only about the connection between two people, but maybe they also influence how we experience ourselves.
Definitely, relationships are like mirrors. They reflect parts of us that we may not notice on our own.
But mirrors can be different. Some mirrors show us confidence. Some show us insecurity. Some show us strengths we forgot we had.
Yes, and that is why certain relationships feel energizing while others feel exhausting. Sometimes the difference is not only about the other person, it is also about who we become when we are around them.
That is such an important point. Have you ever noticed that some people make you feel like you have to carefully control every word you say, while other people make you feel like you can relax completely?
Absolutely. And that feeling tells us something. When we constantly feel like we need to perform, impress, or protect ourselves, we are probably not showing much of our natural self.
Whereas when we feel accepted, different parts of our personality can appear naturally.
Exactly. Think about a conversation with someone you trust. You don't usually plan every sentence. You don't think about whether every opinion is acceptable. You just communicate.
That feeling of freedom is actually very valuable.
It is. And I think many people underestimate how important it is to have relationships where they do not need to perform.
Because modern life often feels like a performance. Online, people carefully choose what to share. At work, people manage their professional image. In social situations, people sometimes try to appear more confident, more successful, or happier than they actually feel.
Yes, there is a constant pressure to present a certain version of ourselves.
And social media has made this even more complicated.
Definitely. Social media allows us to create a version of ourselves that others see. There is nothing wrong with sharing positive moments, but the problem comes when we start comparing our entire reality with someone else's carefully selected image.
Exactly. We compare our ordinary moments with other people's highlights,
And that can make us feel like we are the only ones struggling.
which is ironic because almost everyone is doing the same thing.
Right, many people are showing confidence while privately dealing with uncertainty. Many people are showing happiness while privately experiencing difficulties. The online version of someone is only one small part of who they are.
That connects back to our main topic. Maybe we all have public versions and private versions of ourselves.
Yes, and neither one is necessarily fake. They are simply different levels of openness.
That distinction is important.
Because privacy is not dishonesty. Everyone has parts of themselves that they only share with certain people.
Exactly. We don't tell every person our deepest fears, dreams, or personal experiences. That does not mean we are pretending. It means trust develops gradually,
Yes, vulnerability requires safety.
and safety requires trust.
Exactly.
I want to explore the idea of authenticity because people often say, just be yourself. But what does that actually mean?
That is a complicated phrase. Many people interpret it as never change your behavior for anyone. But that is not realistic. We all adjust depending on the situation.
Right. If someone says, I am just being myself, and uses that as an excuse to ignore everyone else's feelings, that is not necessarily authenticity.
Exactly. Authenticity is not about doing whatever you want without considering others. It is about being honest about who you are while still respecting the people around you.
So authenticity includes awareness.
Yes, a truly authentic person can say, "This is who I am," but I also understand that other people have feelings, needs, and perspectives.
That is a much more mature definition.
Because we are not isolated individuals. We live in relationships. The way we express ourselves affects others.
I think another part of authenticity is accepting that we are always changing.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people think, this is the real me, as if the real self is a permanent thing that never changes.
But humans are constantly developing. The person you are today is influenced by everything you have experienced.
Your relationships,
Your challenges,
your successes,
your mistakes.
your environment.
Exactly.
So maybe the real self is not a fixed object. Maybe it is an ongoing process.
I really like that idea. We are not discovering one final version of ourselves. We are continuously creating ourselves.
That actually makes life more interesting.
It does, because it means you are not trapped by your past.
Someone who was shy in the past can become more confident.
Someone who avoided risks can become more adventurous.
Someone who struggled with communication can learn to express themselves.
People are capable of change.
But change can also create challenges in relationships. Sometimes when we grow, people around us may not immediately understand.
That is very true.
For example, imagine someone who always agrees with everyone suddenly starts setting boundaries. The people around them might say, "You have changed."
Yes, and sometimes that statement is meant negatively, but changing is not always a bad thing.
Exactly. Sometimes growth looks like becoming different.
The difficult part is that relationships often become comfortable with certain versions of us.
That is such an interesting point.
If someone has always been the person who listens, helps, and says yes, others may become used to that role. When that person starts protecting their own time and energy, people may feel surprised.
Even though the change is healthy.
Exactly.
So sometimes becoming more yourself can temporarily create conflict.
Yes, growth can challenge existing relationships.
But healthy relationships can adapt.
That is the key.
A relationship that only works when you stay the same may not truly support your growth.
Exactly.
I think this topic also connects to loneliness. Sometimes people feel lonely because they are surrounded by people who only know one version of them.
That is a very deep observation.
Someone might have many social connections, but still feel unseen because they cannot express their full self.
Yes, real connection is not only about being around people, it is about being known.
And being known requires honesty,
Exactly.
which requires courage.
Because showing more of yourself means accepting the possibility that someone may not understand.
That can be scary.
Very scary.
But without that risk, deeper connection is difficult.
Exactly. If we only show the parts of ourselves we believe others will accept, people may like the image, but they may not truly know the person.
There is another side of this conversation that I find really fascinating. Sometimes we don't just change ourselves around different people, we also discover ourselves through those relationships. Certain people enter our lives, and suddenly we notice qualities we didn't know we had.
That happens all the time. A person might never consider themselves a leader until they are placed in a situation where someone needs guidance. Someone might never think they are creative until they meet people who encourage them to explore new ideas. Sometimes relationships become the environment where hidden parts of our personality finally have a chance to develop.
It reminds me of how different environments can affect plants. The same seed can grow differently depending on the sunlight, water, and soil around it. Maybe people are similar. We carry potential inside us, but our environment influences which parts grow stronger.
That is a great comparison, and it also explains why some people feel like they have changed after moving to a new place or meeting new people. Sometimes they have not become someone completely different. They have simply entered an environment where different qualities are encouraged.
Exactly. Someone who was considered quiet in one environment might become very expressive in another. Someone who felt like they didn't belong somewhere might suddenly feel comfortable somewhere else.
And that can be a life-changing experience. Many people spend years thinking something is wrong with their personality, when the real problem is that they are in an environment that does not allow them to be themselves.
That is such an important idea. Sometimes we blame ourselves when we are actually responding naturally to an unhealthy situation.
Yes, a person who feels constantly anxious around certain people might think, "Why am I so insecure?" But maybe the better question is, what is happening in this relationship that makes me feel this way?
That question changes everything.
Because it moves the focus from judging yourself to understanding the situation.
And understanding yourself requires curiosity, not criticism.
Exactly. Many people try to understand themselves by asking, "What is wrong with me?" But a better question is, "Why do I react this way?"
That is a much kinder approach.
Because behavior always has a reason. Even reactions we don't like usually come from somewhere.
Maybe someone becomes quiet because they learned that speaking up caused conflict in the past. Maybe someone tries too hard to please others because acceptance was something they had to work hard for.
Yes, our current behaviors often have roots in previous experiences.
And understanding those roots helps us decide whether we still want to carry those patterns.
Exactly. Something that protected us in the past may not always serve us in the present.
I think family relationships are probably one of the strongest examples of becoming different versions of ourselves.
Absolutely.
Many people notice that when they visit their family, they suddenly behave differently. They may become more emotional, more defensive, or even feel younger than they actually are.
Yes, and there is a psychological reason for that. Family relationships are usually our earliest relationships. They are connected to our first experiences of acceptance, criticism, support, and identity.
So being around family can activate old patterns.
Exactly. Even if someone has grown a lot, being in the same environment where those patterns developed can bring them back temporarily.
That explains why someone can be confident in their career, but suddenly feel like a teenager when talking with their parents.
Yes, the environment carries memories.
That is fascinating.
A room, a voice, a familiar phrase, or even a certain tone of conversation can remind us of previous experiences.
And sometimes, those old versions of ourselves are not bad. They are simply younger versions.
Exactly. The goal is not to reject who we were. The younger version of ourselves helped us survive and grow.
That is a very compassionate way to see it.
We often criticize our past selves. We say, "Why was I so insecure?" Or, "Why did I make those choices?" But that person was doing the best they could with the understanding they had at that time.
I think everyone deserves that kind of understanding from themselves.
Absolutely.
Another interesting situation happens in professional environments. Many people feel like they have a work personality that is different from their personal personality.
Yes, and this is actually a common experience.
Some people are naturally quiet, but become very confident when they are doing their job.
Because competence creates confidence.
Exactly. When someone understands their role and knows what they are doing, they may express themselves differently.
A person who feels uncertain socially might become very comfortable when discussing a topic they are knowledgeable about.
That shows that confidence is not always about personality. Sometimes it comes from experience and preparation.
Very true.
But there is also a danger when people feel they can only be valuable in their professional role.
Yes, some people become so connected to their achievements that they forget who they are outside of work.
Then retirement, career changes, or failure can become extremely difficult because they feel like they have lost their identity.
Exactly. If your entire sense of self depends on one role, any change to that role can feel like losing yourself.
So maybe it is important to recognize that we are more than what we do.
Absolutely.
We are not only our job,
Not only our achievements,
not only other people's opinions.
we are much bigger than any single description.
I want to return to the question we asked at the beginning. Which version of ourselves is the real one?
After everything we have discussed, I would say the answer is probably all of them.
All of them.
Yes, the serious version, the playful version, the professional version, the emotional version, the quiet version, the confident version. They are all real parts of you.
I love that answer because it removes the pressure to choose one identity.
Exactly. We don't have to decide, this is the real me and everything else is fake. Human beings are not that simple.
Maybe the real self is the person who contains all these different parts.
That makes sense.
The person who can be serious when needed, relaxed when possible, strong during challenges, and vulnerable with trusted people.
Yes, authenticity may not mean being exactly the same everywhere. It may mean knowing that every version of yourself comes from the same core.
That is a beautiful way to explain it. I also think there is a lot of freedom in accepting that people will never fully understand every part of us.
That can actually be comforting.
Really,
Yes, because sometimes we spend so much energy trying to control how others see us. We want everyone to understand our intentions, our personality, and our choices.
but that is impossible.
Exactly. Every person sees us through their own experiences and expectations.
So two people can know us and still have completely different impressions
Yes, and that is okay.
because our identity does not depend entirely on other people's understanding.
Exactly. Other people's opinions are information, but they are not the complete truth about who we are.
This conversation makes me realize that knowing ourselves is actually a lifelong process.
Definitely.
Every new relationship teaches us something.
Every challenge reveals something,
Every stage of life creates a new version of ourselves.
and every version deserves understanding,
Not judgment,
not rejection.
understanding. There is something else I want to explore because I think many people experience it but rarely talk about it. Sometimes we do not just become different people around different people. Sometimes we feel like we have lost a part of ourselves because of certain relationships or life experiences.
Yes, and that feeling can be very confusing. Someone might say, I don't feel like myself anymore. They may not even know exactly when it happened, but they feel disconnected from the person they used to be.
Exactly. Maybe they used to have hobbies they loved, opinions they expressed freely, or dreams they were excited about. But after years of adapting to responsibilities, expectations, or other people's needs, they suddenly realize they have been focusing so much on fitting into their environment that they have forgotten what feels natural to them.
That is a very common human experience. Life requires adaptation, but sometimes we adapt so much that we stop checking whether the direction we are adapting toward still feels right.
That sentence is really important because adapting is necessary, but constant adaptation without self-reflection can make us feel disconnected.
Yes, imagine someone who is always adjusting the temperature for everyone else in a room, but never asking whether they are comfortable. Eventually, they may forget what comfort feels like for themselves.
That is such a good example.
And this often happens in relationships. People naturally want harmony, so they compromise. Compromise itself is healthy. The problem begins when one person is always the one compromising and slowly disappears inside the relationship.
Right. A healthy relationship allows both people to exist. It should not require one person to become smaller so the other person can feel comfortable.
Exactly.
I think many people confuse love with complete adjustment. They think, if I love someone, I should always understand them, support them, and change for them. But love also requires being honest about your own needs.
Absolutely. Real connection is not created by two people pretending to have no differences. It is created by two people who can be different and still respect each other.
That is a very mature view of relationships.
Because differences are inevitable. The question is not whether differences exist. The question is whether people can handle those differences with respect.
Let's talk about friendships, because friendships can also bring out very different versions of ourselves.
Definitely. I think friendships are interesting because we usually choose them more freely than family relationships.
Yes, we are born into families, but friendships are often built around shared interests, values, experiences, or simply feeling understood.
And sometimes a friend knows a side of us that almost nobody else sees.
Exactly. Maybe there is a friend who knows all your strange habits, your embarrassing stories, and your biggest fears, but still accepts you.
Those relationships can be incredibly valuable because they create a space where we do not need to constantly manage our image.
That phrase is interesting. Managing our image.
Yes, many people spend a lot of energy thinking about how they appear to others. They ask themselves, do I look successful enough? Do I sound intelligent enough? Do people respect me?
But with certain friends, those questions disappear.
Exactly, you are not performing, you are participating.
I like that difference.
Performing means you are focused on how you are being seen. Participating means you are focused on the experience itself.
That is a really useful distinction.
And maybe the people who make us feel most comfortable are the ones who allow us to stop performing.
Something else that affects how we behave is our expectations about how others see us.
Yes, and this is a fascinating psychological area.
Because sometimes we act according to the role we believe others expect us to play.
Exactly. If everyone around someone treats them as the responsible one, they may feel pressure to always be responsible. If they are seen as the funny one, they may feel like they always need to entertain others.
That can become exhausting
Very exhausting.
because even positive labels can become limiting.
Absolutely. People usually think only negative labels are harmful, but positive labels can create pressure too.
For example, someone who is always described as strong may feel like they are not allowed to struggle.
Yes, someone who is always the successful one may feel afraid to admit failure. Someone who is always the helper may feel guilty when they need help themselves.
That is such an important point.
A role can become a kind of invisible responsibility.
And sometimes people forget that behind the role is a human being.
Exactly.
I think this connects to why some people feel exhausted after social situations.
Yes, and it is not always because they dislike people.
Right. Sometimes they are tired because they have been monitoring themselves constantly.
Exactly. They are thinking about every word, every reaction, every impression they create.
That must be mentally exhausting.
It is. Imagine having a conversation while also watching yourself from the outside the entire time. You are not only participating in the conversation, you are analyzing your performance.
That is a powerful description,
And many people do this without realizing it.
especially people who worry about being judged.
Yes, they may not feel free to simply exist. They feel like they need to earn acceptance.
But acceptance that requires constant performance is not true comfort.
Exactly.
I wonder if part of growing up is learning where we can stop performing.
I think that is a big part of it.
Because when we are younger, fitting in can feel extremely important.
Yes, acceptance from others often feels connected to safety.
But as we become older, we hopefully learn that we do not need everyone to approve of us.
Exactly. Maturity is partly understanding that being liked by everyone is impossible.
And maybe not even desirable.
Right, because if everyone likes every version of you, it might mean you are not showing enough of yourself.
That is an interesting idea.
Think about it. A person with clear values will naturally disagree with some people. Someone who makes decisions will naturally disappoint someone. Someone who expresses honest opinions will not be accepted by everyone.
So being yourself automatically creates some disagreement.
Yes, and that is not failure. That is normal.
I think many people spend years trying to become someone everyone approves of, but eventually, they realize that peace comes from accepting that not everyone will understand them.
Absolutely.
Because there is a difference between being respected and being universally liked.
That difference is huge.
Being respected means people may not always agree with you, but they recognize your honesty and consistency.
Exactly.
Being universally liked often requires changing depending on who you are with.
And that can become exhausting.
So maybe the question is not, how can I make everyone see the same version of me?
Maybe the question is, how can I become comfortable with all the different parts of myself?
That feels much healthier.
Because when you accept yourself, you no longer need to control every impression.
You can still adapt.
You can still be considerate,
You can still learn.
but you do not lose yourself in the process.
There is another interesting question connected to all of this. If everyone sees a different version of us, how do we know ourselves clearly? How do we understand who we really are when our behavior changes so much depending on the situation?
That is probably one of the biggest questions people ask when they start exploring identity. But maybe the mistake is assuming that we can only know ourselves through our behavior. Our behavior changes, but there are deeper things that remain more stable.
Such as,
Things like our values, our priorities, the things we care about, the principles we want to live by. Those things often stay more consistent even when our personality appears different in different situations.
that makes sense. Someone might speak differently at work and at home, but their core values might remain the same. They might still care about honesty, kindness, creativity, or fairness.
Exactly. The expression changes, but the foundation remains.
That is actually a very comforting idea, because many people worry that changing themselves means they are losing their identity. But maybe identity is not about acting the same way everywhere. Maybe it is about staying connected to what matters most.
I agree. Think about a musician. A musician can play different songs in different styles, but the person creating the music is still the same artist. The expression changes depending on the situation.
That is a beautiful example.
The same thing happens with people. We express different emotions, different skills, and different parts of our personality depending on the environment.
So maybe we are not one single version of ourselves. Maybe we are more like a complete collection of different versions connected by the same core.
Exactly.
I also want to talk about something that happens when people move to a new place. Have you noticed that some people seem to completely change after moving to a different city or country?
Yes, and that is actually a perfect example of how environment influences identity.
Because sometimes people who were very quiet in their hometown become much more confident somewhere new.
Right, a new environment can remove old expectations. When nobody knows your past, you are not limited by the role people previously gave you.
That is such an interesting point. Sometimes we carry other people's opinions of us for years.
Yes, if someone has always been treated as shy, unsuccessful, or inexperienced, they may unconsciously continue behaving according to that image.
But when they enter a new environment, they have a chance to introduce themselves differently.
Exactly. Nobody there knows the old story.
So they can create a new chapter.
Yes,
That explains why travel and living abroad can be such powerful experiences for many people.
definitely. It is not only about seeing new places, it is about seeing yourself in a different context.
You discover how you react when your usual support systems are gone.
You discover new abilities.
You discover new fears too.
Exactly. A new environment reveals different parts of you.
But there is also something interesting about returning home after changing.
Yes, many people experience that.
They return to their old environment, and suddenly they feel like they are becoming their old self again.
That can be very confusing.
Because they think, I changed. Why do I feel like the old me?
But maybe both versions are real. The person who grew in the new environment is real, and the person connected to their past is also real.
That is such an important point.
Growth does not erase history. We carry our previous experiences with us.
So going back does not mean going backward.
Exactly. Sometimes it simply means reconnecting with another part of yourself.
I think one of the hardest things for people is accepting that they contain many different sides, including sides they do not always like.
Absolutely.
Everyone wants to believe they are consistent. We want to see ourselves as one type of person.
Yes, people often create simple stories about themselves. I am a confident person. I am not a creative person. I am not good with people. But human beings are much more flexible than these labels suggest.
A label can become a limitation.
Exactly. If someone says, I am not a social person, they might avoid situations where they could actually develop relationships. If someone says, I am not a leader, they might never discover leadership abilities.
So sometimes understanding ourselves means questioning the stories we tell ourselves.
Yes, especially the stories we have repeated for many years.
Because repetition can make something feel true.
Exactly. But something feeling familiar does not always mean it is accurate.
There is another side of identity that I find fascinating. Sometimes we hide certain parts of ourselves because we think they are not acceptable.
Yes, almost everyone does this to some degree.
Maybe someone hides their sensitivity because they believe they need to appear strong.
Or someone hides their ambition because they are afraid people will think they are arrogant.
Or someone hides their creativity because they are afraid it is unrealistic.
Exactly.
And over time, those hidden parts can become disconnected from us.
Yes, we may start believing the version we show others is the only version that exists.
That must be a very lonely feeling.
It can be, because a person may receive attention and approval but still feel unseen.
Because people are appreciating the image, not the complete person.
Exactly.
So how do we become more comfortable showing different parts of ourselves?
I think it begins with choosing the right environments. Not every person deserves access to every part of you.
That is an important point.
People sometimes think authenticity means showing everything to everyone, but healthy boundaries are part of authenticity too.
Yes, trust has to be built.
Exactly. Being open does not mean being completely exposed all the time.
It means knowing where openness is safe.
Right.
And maybe the people who truly know us are not the people who know every detail about our lives, but the people who make us feel safe enough to be honest.
That is beautifully said.
I think another important lesson is that we should not judge ourselves too harshly for changing.
Definitely.
Sometimes people say, I used to be different. I don't recognize myself anymore.
But maybe becoming different is exactly what life is about.
Yes, the person you were 5 years ago had different experiences, different knowledge, and different needs.
Expecting yourself to remain exactly the same would actually be unnatural.
Growth requires change,
And change requires letting go of old versions sometimes.
even versions we loved.
Exactly.
Maybe the most interesting thing about identity is that it is not something we discover once and finish.
It is something we continue building
Through relationships,
through experiences,
through choices,
through challenges.
through moments when we realize something new about ourselves.
Exactly.
And maybe that is why life remains interesting. We are always meeting new versions of ourselves.
That is a wonderful way to see it.
There is one more thing I want to discuss because I believe it affects almost everyone. The difference between changing because we are growing and changing because we are afraid. From the outside, these two things can look very similar. A person might change their behavior, their goals, or their lifestyle, but the reason behind that change makes a huge difference.
That is a really important distinction. Growth usually comes from a place of curiosity and self-respect. Fear-based change usually comes from insecurity or the need to avoid rejection.
Can you give an example?
Sure, imagine someone decides to learn a new skill because they are curious and excited about developing themselves. That change is connected to growth. But imagine someone changes everything about themselves because they believe nobody will accept them otherwise. They may become successful or popular, but internally they might still feel disconnected.
So the action may look the same, but the motivation is different.
Exactly. Two people can make the same decision for completely different reasons.
That is something people often overlook. We focus so much on what people do, but we rarely ask why they do it.
Yes, and understanding the why behind our choices helps us understand ourselves better.
I think this applies especially to relationships. Someone might become quieter because they have learned emotional control and maturity. Another person might become quieter because they are afraid their opinions will not be accepted. The behavior looks similar, but the experience inside is completely different.
That is a great example. External behavior does not always reveal internal reality.
Which means we should also be careful when judging other people.
Absolutely. We usually see what someone does, but we rarely know what they are experiencing internally.
Someone who seems distant might actually be protecting themselves. Someone who seems confident might actually be struggling with insecurity. Someone who seems successful might still be searching for meaning.
Exactly. Every person has an inner world that other people cannot fully see.
I think one reason people struggle with identity is because they want certainty. They want to find one final answer. This is who I am. But maybe identity is not supposed to be completely fixed.
I agree. A completely fixed identity might actually prevent growth.
Because if you believe you are only one type of person, you may reject experiences that could help you develop.
Exactly. Someone who says, I am not adventurous, may avoid opportunities that could show them a new side of themselves.
Someone who says, I am not creative, may never try creative activities.
Someone who says, I am not a leader, may never discover leadership abilities.
So sometimes our identity is limited by our own beliefs.
Yes, the stories we tell ourselves become boundaries.
That is a powerful idea,
And the good news is that boundaries can be changed.
because identity is not a prison.
Exactly, it is a starting point.
Another thing I find fascinating is how different stages of life can bring out completely different versions of ourselves.
Absolutely.
A person in their 20s may have a very different personality from the same person in their 40s or 60s.
Yes, not because one version is more real than another, but because life creates different priorities.
When people are younger, they may focus more on exploration, discovering possibilities, and building independence.
Later, they may focus more on stability, relationships, contribution, or wisdom.
And those changes can sometimes surprise us.
Definitely, someone may say, I never imagined I would become this kind of person.
But maybe that is the beauty of life.
Exactly, we are constantly becoming,
The person you become is influenced by the choices you make today,
and also by experiences you cannot predict.
which means we should leave room for surprise.
Yes,
I also want to talk about the pressure to have a consistent personal brand. Nowadays, people are often encouraged to create a clear image of themselves.
yes, especially online.
People are told to define themselves, choose a niche, create a recognizable identity, show the world who you are.
There can be benefits to that, but it can also become limiting.
Because human beings are not brands.
Exactly, a brand needs consistency. A person needs space to change.
That is such an important difference.
A company may want people to recognize the same message every time, but a human being is supposed to learn, change, and sometimes contradict their previous beliefs.
Right, changing your mind does not always mean you were wrong before.
Exactly. Sometimes it means you learn something new.
But online, people often feel afraid to change because old opinions or old versions of themselves remain visible.
Yes, the internet can make personal growth feel complicated because your past is always accessible.
Everyone can see who you were years ago.
But people naturally evolve.
Maybe we need to give ourselves permission to outgrow old versions of ourselves.
Absolutely.
Something else that interests me is how certain relationships only connect with certain stages of our lives.
Yes, and that can be painful.
Because sometimes we care about someone, but we realize we are no longer becoming better versions of ourselves together.
That is a difficult realization.
Especially because the relationship may not be bad.
Exactly. Sometimes there is no villain. Sometimes two people simply grow in different directions.
And accepting that can be very hard.
Because we often think relationships should last forever if they are meaningful.
But maybe something can be meaningful, even if it does not last forever.
I agree.
A person can influence your life deeply without staying in every chapter.
Exactly. Some people are part of our journey for a specific period.
They teach us something,
They help us become someone new.
and then life continues. I think there is a lot of sadness that comes from trying to keep old versions of ourselves and old versions of relationships forever.
Yes, because life naturally changes.
People change,
Situations change.
priorities change.
And resisting every change can create unnecessary suffering.
Maybe acceptance is not giving up
It is recognizing reality.
and choosing how to move forward.
Exactly.
So after everything we have discussed, maybe becoming different people around different people is not something we should fear.
Maybe it is something we should understand.
Because every version of ourselves tells a story.
Every version represents an experience.
Every version shows something we value, something we learned, or something we are becoming.
And the goal is not to choose one version and reject the others.
The goal is to bring them together.
To create a complete understanding of ourselves.
When we talk about different versions of ourselves, there is another important aspect that we should not ignore: the relationship between who we are and who we think we should be. Sometimes the biggest conflict is not between us and other people, but between our current self and the ideal version of ourselves that we have created in our minds.
That is such a common struggle. Many people carry an invisible image of the person they believe they should become. Maybe they think they should be more confident, more successful, more organized, more social, or more accomplished. Then they compare their real life with that imaginary version.
And that comparison can be exhausting, because the ideal version is often impossible to reach.
Exactly. The ideal self usually has no weaknesses, no bad days, no mistakes, and no uncertainty. But real human beings do not work that way.
We are complicated.
Very complicated.
We can be motivated one day and tired the next. We can feel confident in one area and insecure in another. We can understand something intellectually, but still struggle emotionally.
Yes, and that does not make us inconsistent. It makes us human.
I think people sometimes believe that becoming their best self means removing all imperfections.
But maybe becoming your best self means learning how to live with your imperfections while continuing to grow.
That is a much more realistic idea.
Because your weaknesses are also part of your story. They often teach you patience, empathy, and understanding.
For example, someone who struggled with confidence may later become someone who deeply understands other people's insecurities.
Exactly. The experiences we sometimes want to erase can become the experiences that shape our strongest qualities.
This also connects to how we judge ourselves when we behave differently from our expectations.
Yes,
Imagine someone who considers themselves a calm person, but one day they become angry during an argument. They might think, that is not who I am.
but maybe that reaction is also part of who they are. A calm person can still feel anger. A patient person can still become frustrated.
Exactly. Having emotions does not cancel out our identity.
Right. Sometimes people reject parts of themselves because those parts do not match the image they prefer.
They think, I should not feel this way.
But emotions are information. They tell us something about our needs, our boundaries, and our experiences.
So instead of asking, why am I like this? Maybe we can ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me?
That is a much healthier question.
I think another reason we become different around different people is because every relationship has its own language.
That is a fascinating idea.
Yes, think about the way you communicate with someone you have known for 20 years compared with someone you just met. The words, the jokes, even the silence can mean something completely different.
Absolutely. Long-term relationships develop their own patterns. They have shared memories, shared experiences, and a history that creates a unique connection.
Which means a certain version of yourself exists because of that shared history.
Exactly. There are parts of you that appear because of the relationship itself.
For example, maybe there is a friend who always makes you laugh because of memories only the two of you understand.
Or a family member who brings out stories from your childhood.
Or a colleague who encourages your professional confidence.
Each relationship creates a different space.
And different spaces reveal different parts of us. But there is also a danger in allowing other people to define us completely.
Yes, because then we give away too much control over our identity.
For example, if someone constantly tells you, you are not the kind of person who does that, you may start believing them.
Exactly. Other people's opinions can influence us, especially when they come from people we respect.
Parents, teachers, partners, close friends.
Yes, their voices can become part of our own inner voice.
Sometimes people continue hearing criticism from years ago even when the person who said it is no longer present.
That is very true.
A person may still think, I am not talented, because someone told them that when they were young.
Or I am too sensitive. I am not interesting. I will never succeed.
And eventually, those statements become beliefs.
Which is why we need to examine the voices we carry inside ourselves.
I want to talk about something positive now. The possibility of meeting people who introduce us to better versions of ourselves.
I love this idea because relationships are not only about challenges, they can also expand our understanding of who we can become.
Exactly. Sometimes one person believes in us before we believe in ourselves.
A teacher, a friend, a partner, or even a stranger can sometimes see potential that we cannot see.
And that belief can change the way we see ourselves.
Yes, when someone treats you like a capable person, you may begin acting like one.
Because relationships influence our self-image.
Exactly.
That is why choosing the people around us matters so much.
Yes, not because we should only surround ourselves with people who agree with everything we do, but because healthy relationships encourage growth.
They challenge us without destroying our confidence.
They support us without controlling us.
They allow us to change without making us feel like we are betraying who we were.
That balance is very important.
There is also something beautiful about realizing that we can be different things at different times.
Yes,
A person can be a student, a friend, a parent, a professional, a creator, a beginner, and a teacher all at the same time.
exactly. Human identity is layered.
And maybe many problems come from trying to reduce ourselves to one label.
Absolutely.
When someone asks, who are you? We often answer with a job title or a simple description.
But those answers are only small pieces,
A person is not only their occupation,
not only their achievements,
not only their relationship status.
not only their mistakes.
A person is the whole story. I think that is why self-acceptance is so important. If we accept that we are complex, we become less afraid of change.
Exactly.
We stop asking, am I still the same person?
And start asking, am I becoming someone I respect?
That is a much deeper question.
Because the goal is not to stay exactly the same forever.
The goal is to grow while staying connected to ourselves.
Yes,
There is another question that often appears when we talk about identity. Do we need other people to know us in order to truly know ourselves? Because sometimes it feels like we understand ourselves better when we see how we interact with others.
that is a very interesting question. I believe relationships can definitely help us understand ourselves, but they are not the only source of self-knowledge. Other people can show us things about ourselves, but they cannot completely define us.
That distinction is important because sometimes people rely too much on external feedback. They think, if people like me, I must be valuable. If people reject me, something must be wrong with me.
Yes, and that creates a very unstable sense of identity. When your opinion of yourself depends completely on other people's reactions, you are constantly changing based on external situations.
One day you feel confident because someone praises you. The next day you feel insecure because someone criticizes you.
Exactly. It becomes like building a house on moving ground.
So maybe part of knowing ourselves is developing an inner foundation.
Yes, a foundation based on self-awareness, values, and personal understanding.
Because other people's opinions can be useful, but they should not be the only information we use.
Exactly. Feedback is valuable, but it needs to be balanced with self-reflection.
That sounds simple, but it can be difficult,
Very difficult.
especially because humans naturally want acceptance.
Of course, we are social beings. Belonging is a deep human need.
So the desire to be understood is not a weakness.
Not at all. It is completely natural.
The challenge is learning how to want connection without losing ourselves.
That might be one of the biggest skills in life.
I also think this topic connects to creativity. Many creative people talk about needing freedom to express different sides of themselves.
Absolutely.
A writer, an artist, a musician, or anyone who creates something often has to explore different emotions and perspectives.
Yes, creativity requires flexibility. If someone only allows themselves to be one version of who they are, they may limit what they can create.
Because creativity often comes from curiosity.
Exactly.
Curiosity about other people.
Curiosity about the world.
Curiosity about ourselves.
And sometimes curiosity about the parts of ourselves we do not fully understand.
That is interesting, because people often try to avoid uncomfortable parts of themselves.
Yes, but those uncomfortable parts can sometimes contain valuable information.
For example, sadness can teach us what we care about.
Anger can show us where our boundaries are.
Fear can reveal what matters to us.
Exactly.
So maybe accepting ourselves does not mean liking every part of ourselves. It means being willing to understand every part.
That is a very important difference.
Another thing I have noticed is that people sometimes feel pressure to choose between being independent and being influenced by others.
Yes, people often see those as opposites,
They think, if I am influenced by someone, I am not being myself.
but that is not true. Every person is influenced by others. Our language, beliefs, habits, and perspectives are all shaped through relationships and experiences.
Exactly. Nobody creates themselves completely alone.
Right? The question is not whether we are influenced. The question is whether we choose influences consciously.
That is a powerful idea.
We can learn from others without losing ourselves.
We can admire someone without becoming them.
We can accept advice without giving up our own judgment.
We can change because of relationships while still remaining connected to our values.
Exactly.
I think many people struggle because they believe there is one correct way to be themselves.
Yes,
But maybe being yourself looks different in different moments.
absolutely.
Being yourself with a close friend may look like being relaxed and playful.
Being yourself at work may look like being responsible and focused.
Being yourself during a difficult moment may look like admitting you need help.
Being yourself while learning something new may look like accepting that you are inexperienced.
All of these can be authentic.
Exactly.
Let's talk about confidence for a moment, because I think confidence is often misunderstood in this conversation.
Yes, many people believe confident people always show the same personality everywhere.
But maybe confidence is actually the ability to accept different parts of yourself.
I agree.
Someone who is truly confident does not need to prove they are always strong.
Exactly. They can admit uncertainty.
They can say, I don't know.
They can ask for help.
They can apologize.
They can change their mind.
That kind of flexibility actually requires confidence.
Yes, insecurity often creates a need to protect a certain image.
While confidence allows someone to be more open.
Exactly.
I also want to mention how important it is to spend time alone.
Definitely.
Because when we are constantly surrounded by other people's expectations, it can become difficult to hear our own thoughts.
Yes, solitude gives us space to reconnect with ourselves.
Not loneliness.
Right, there is a difference.
Loneliness is feeling disconnected.
Solitude can be a choice that helps us reconnect.
During quiet moments, we can notice what we actually enjoy, what we actually believe, and what we actually want,
Exactly.
without the influence of immediate reactions from others.
That is why many people have important realizations when they travel alone, walk alone, or spend time away from their usual routines.
They finally hear their own voice. But I think there is also a balance. We should not become obsessed with analyzing ourselves all the time.
That is a very good point.
Because self-awareness is helpful, but overthinking ourselves can become another trap.
Exactly. Sometimes people spend so much time asking, "Who am I?" that they forget to simply live.
That is interesting.
Identity is not only something we think about, it is something we experience
Through action,
through relationships,
through trying new things,
through making mistakes.
through everyday life.
Exactly.
Maybe the best way to understand ourselves is not to stay still and search for an answer, but to continue moving and discovering.
I completely agree.
Because every experience adds another piece to the picture.
Every person we meet teaches us something.
Every challenge reveals something.
Every choice shapes something.
And slowly, we begin to understand the person we are becoming.
That process never really ends.
As we continue this conversation, I keep thinking about how strange and beautiful human identity really is. We spend so much time trying to define ourselves, but at the same time, we are constantly changing. We want a clear answer to the question, who am I? But maybe the answer is always evolving.
I agree. Maybe identity is not a final destination. Maybe it is more like a journey. We are not trying to arrive at one perfect version of ourselves. We are learning how to move through different stages of life while staying connected to what matters.
That idea can actually remove a lot of pressure. Many people feel anxious because they believe they have not found themselves yet.
Yes, people often talk about finding yourself as if there is a hidden version of you somewhere waiting to be discovered.
But maybe you do not find yourself like you find a lost object,
Exactly. Maybe you create yourself through your experiences,
through the choices you make,
through the relationships you build,
through the challenges you overcome.
through the lessons you learn.
That changes the way we see personal growth.
Definitely. Growth is not about uncovering a perfect identity. It is about becoming more aware of yourself and making more intentional choices.
I want to talk about mistakes, because mistakes often change how we see ourselves.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people make one mistake and immediately create a negative identity around it. They say, I failed, so I am a failure.
Yes, and that is a very common but harmful way of thinking.
Because an action and an identity are not the same thing.
Exactly. Making a mistake does not define the entire person.
Someone can make a bad decision and still be a good person.
Someone can fail at something and still have ability.
Someone can struggle in one area and still have many strengths.
Exactly.
But why do people connect mistakes so strongly with identity?
I think part of it is because humans naturally create stories. We try to understand ourselves by creating explanations. When something goes wrong, we want to know why. Sometimes the easiest explanation is to blame ourselves completely.
So instead of saying, I made a mistake, we say, I am the mistake.
Exactly.
That is a very painful difference.
And it prevents growth because if you believe the problem is who you are, you may stop trying.
But if you believe the problem is something you did, you can learn and improve.
Exactly.
This connects back to different versions of ourselves, because sometimes a difficult experience creates a new version of us.
Yes.
Someone who experiences failure may become more patient.
Someone who experiences loss may become more compassionate.
Someone who faces uncertainty may become more courageous.
Exactly. Difficult experiences can transform us.
Not because suffering is automatically good,
Right? We should not romanticize pain.
but because humans have the ability to learn from experiences.
Exactly.
The challenge becomes part of our story, but it does not have to become the whole story.
That is a very important point.
I think another reason we become different versions of ourselves is because different situations require different strengths.
Yes,
Someone may need patience as a parent.
they may need confidence as a professional.
They may need vulnerability in close relationships.
They may need independence when making personal decisions.
Different situations call for different qualities.
Exactly. A person is like a toolbox. Different situations require different tools.
That is a great metaphor.
The fact that you use one tool more often does not mean the other tools do not exist.
Maybe some people think they are not capable because they have not needed to use certain qualities yet.
Exactly.
Someone might think they are not brave until life gives them a reason to be brave.
Someone might think they are not strong until they experience something difficult.
Someone might think they are not creative until they face a problem that requires a new solution.
Exactly.
There is also a connection between identity and fear. Sometimes we avoid certain experiences because they do not match the person we believe we are.
Yes.
For example, someone may say, I am not the kind of person who travels alone,
Or I am not someone who speaks in public.
or I am not someone who starts new things.
And those statements may become limits.
But what if trying something new creates a different version of yourself?
Exactly. Sometimes we discover ourselves through action, not before action.
That is such an important idea.
Many people wait until they feel ready before they try something new. But confidence often comes after experience, not before.
So sometimes we have to become the person who can do something by doing it.
Exactly.
I think this is especially relevant for people who feel stuck in old identities.
Yes.
Maybe someone has always been known as the quiet person, the unsuccessful person, the person who never takes risks.
And because people around them expect that version, changing can feel uncomfortable.
Not only for themselves, but for others.
Exactly. Sometimes people are surprised when we change because they are used to a previous version of us.
They may say, you are different now.
And sometimes that is actually true.
But different does not mean worse.
Exactly.
It may mean growth.
It may mean healing.
It may mean becoming more honest. I think one of the most freeing realizations is understanding that we do not need permission to grow.
Absolutely.
We do not need everyone from our past to understand our future.
Yes.
We do not need everyone to agree with every change we make,
Exactly.
because our lives belong to us,
And our identity is something we have the responsibility to develop.
not something we simply accept from other people.
Exactly.
Before we finish this conversation, I want to ask you one final question. If someone is listening right now and they feel confused because they act differently around different people, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that this experience is normal. Having different sides of yourself does not mean you are fake. It means you are human. The important thing is to understand whether those different sides are expressions of yourself or masks you wear because you are afraid.
That is a very important difference.
Yes, if you can move between different situations while still respecting your values and your needs, that is healthy adaptation. But if you constantly hide yourself and ignore who you are to gain acceptance, that is something worth examining.
So the goal is not to become exactly the same person everywhere.
Right.
The goal is to feel connected to yourself everywhere,
Exactly.
whether you are with family,
With friends,
at work.
or completely alone.
Every version of you is still you.
And every version has something valuable to offer.
Maybe that is the most beautiful thing about being human. We are never only one thing.
We are always learning, changing, and discovering new parts of ourselves.
The person we were yesterday helped create the person we are today.
And the person we become tomorrow is shaped by the choices we make now.
So instead of asking, which version of me is the real one?
Maybe we can ask, how can I understand and accept all the versions of myself?
Because every version has a story.
And every story is still part of the same person.